Hi guys, it's me. I'm going to read you a story, okay? So I chose this story. It's called Puss in Boots. Right, here we go. Puss in Boots. A certain miller was so poor that when he died, all he left his 3 sons were his mill, his mule, and a cat. "Bagsy me the mill," said the eldest son. "Bagsy me the mule," said the middle son. "Oh, great," said the youngest son. "I suppose I'm left with the cat then." As you can tell, he wasn't very happy about it. But youngest children often start off with a bad deal in fairy tales, so he should really have seen it coming. "Stop your moaning," scolded the cat. "If you stick with me, I can guarantee that you'll be thanking your dear old dad later. Now fetch me a large bag and leave me to get on with things. Oh, and get me a smart pair of boots made from the finest red leather, just like I've always wanted." The youngest son didn't argue. Firstly, the cat had never talked before, so he was speechless with shock. And secondly, he didn't have a better plan to suggest anyway. So he took what little money he had saved under the mattress and did exactly what the cat had told him. As soon as Puss had finished purring with delight at how fine he looked in his smart boots of the finest red leather, he hurried along to a field and lay down quite still with his bag wide open beside him. After a while, hop, 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 along came a plump bunny. Pop! The silly rabbit jumped straight into the bag. Zip! Puss shut the bag. Whistling merrily, he took his catch to the palace and presented it to the king. "My master, the Marquis of Carabas, sends you this gift," Puss announced, bowing low. "Give him my warmest thanks," the king announced, smiling graciously. As soon as Puss was gone, the king returned to his chamberlain and whispered, "Whoever this Marquis is, he must be very rich and important to send his messengers in such smart boots." The next day the cat was back again with a present of 2 partridges, and the day after that with 3 pheasants. Every day for 3 months, Puss arrived at court with a gift for the king from his master, the Marquis of Carabas. "What a thoughtful, kind-hearted man this Marquis of Carabas is," the king exclaimed, as his royal pantry filled up with delicious game. One day, Puss learned that the king was going to take a drive along the river with his beautiful daughter. "Right, you're going for a swim," the cat commanded the miller's youngest son. But I don't have any swimming trunks," the Marquis of Carabas protested. But Puss was already dragging him along to a certain spot on the riverbank. Before he knew it, the cat had taken away all his clothes, and he was swimming around obediently among the waterweed. Just then the royal carriage came trundling by. "Help! Help!" shouted Puss, running out onto the road and flagging it down. "The Marquis of Carabas is drowning!" The princess squealed with fright as she peered out of the carriage and saw a man splashing about in the water. At once the king ordered his guards into the river to pull him out. "Your Majesty," purred the cat, as the soldiers began trying to give the startled miller's son the kiss of life. "As if it wasn't bad enough that the Marquis of Carabas has nearly drowned, while he was in the water, robbers have stolen all his clothes." The king tut-tutted and sent his chamberlain galloping back to the palace to bring a selection of his very own robes for the Marquis to wear. Soon the miller's son was looking exceedingly handsome in the king's best suit, and the princess was blushing a deep pink. "It's the very least I can do in return for all the kind gifts you have been sending me," the king said earnestly. The miller's son had no idea what the king was talking about, but he thought it best just to nod and smile all the same. "You will come and ride with us a while, won't you?" insisted the king, and the miller's son was ushered up into the royal carriage to sit next to the princess. Puss was highly excited that his scheme was working, and he ran ahead down the road. By and by he came to a hayfield of mowers, and he said, "Good people, if you don't tell the king that this field belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, I'll make you all into cat food." It wasn't long before the royal carriage passed by, and sure enough, the king leaned out of the window and asked, "Who does this land belong to?" It belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, the terrified mowers stuttered. You have a fine estate, the king beamed at the miller's youngest son, and the so-called Marquis nodded and smiled. Soon the royal carriage came to a cornfield of harvesters. The miller's youngest son was just as surprised as the king to learn from the harvesters that the cornfield belonged to him too. A little further down the road, and a group of dairymaids insisted that their cows belonged to the Marquis of Carabas. "My," the king grinned, "what splendid lands you have!" And the princess's cheeks turned quite rosy with pleasure. While the royal carriage rolled along, Puss was a long way down the road at a fearful ogre's castle. It was the ogre who owned all the land that Puss had been giving to the Marquis of Carabas, though, luckily, the ogre didn't know about that. "Mr. Ogre," began Puss politely, "I have come to pay my respects to you, because I have heard that you have remarkable powers. Is it true that you can turn yourself from a big, hulking ogre into a tiny, sneaky mouse?" "Easy peasy," growled the ogre. He disappeared before Puss's very eyes, and suddenly there was a mouse scurrying about on the floor. It took Puss only a few seconds to pounce and gobble him up, and that was the end of the ogre. By the time the royal carriage pulled up outside the castle, Puss was waiting outside to greet it. "Welcome to the home of the Marquis of Carabas," Puss announced proudly. The cat ushered the highly surprised miller's youngest son and his stunned royal guests inside, where they found a delicious banquet the servants had prepared for them at Puss's instructions. "My dear Marquis," beamed the king, "I am most impressed with your generosity. If there's anything I can do for you, just say the word." The miller's son glanced at the princess, who hissed under her breath, "Go on, ask him." So the Marquis of Carabas cleared his throat and said, "Actually, I'd quite like to marry your daughter," and the king roared with happy laughter. The couple were married that very day, and the miller's youngest son lived as the rich and prosperous Marquis of Carabas for the rest of his life. So his story has a happy ending after all, and that's what happens in fairy tales, so he really should have seen it coming. As for Puss, well, he lived happily at the castle too. There were plenty of mice to catch, and that's all he needed to be content, as well as his smart boots of the finest red leather, of course. That's the end. I hope you liked it. I love you guys. Bye.